Thank you, everyone, for signing on to our talk today on unlocking potential effective parenting strategies for children with ADHD. My name is Dr. Ed Roldan. I am so grateful. If you've seen any of my talks, you know I say that over and over. I'm so grateful for you taking the time to sign on and join me in today's talk. We'll get started because we have a lot of information to get through. Today's quite heavy in terms of content, and so I want to get into it. A couple things, just again, starting off by thanking the team at Prime Care Family Health that has been instrumental in setting this up. I am really appreciative of their efforts and their invitation for me to do these talks. This is the third of four scheduled talks. We have another one in 2 weeks on navigating separation and divorce in families. I also want to thank Miss Alina Lyons, who works at my clinic. She's a candidate in the doctorate in education, and she does assessments at our clinic. And so she's here helping to navigate sort of the chat and support me today. So thank you so much to Alina. Just one thing, actually, if you haven't seen my talks, I usually explain this, but I'm using a device where I have two screens that are stacked. So if you ever see me look like I'm looking down, it's because I have a second screen where I can see the chat and I can sort of interact with whatever's happening in the conversation. And so that's why I may be looking down. Way that is gone, then that means I'm not sharing anymore. I do apologize. I'm going to ask, please, if you try to avoid any of the buttons, I would appreciate it. Again, what I was saying to you is I'm going to be throwing a lot of information at you. Please take one or two things that are relevant to you. And at the same time, I will be sharing the slides and the webinar itself will be uploaded to our YouTube channel, EPS Family Health, but it will also be shared through Prime Care. So if you came through Prime Care, you can get it through them. If not, you can go to our YouTube channel, EPS Family Health, and you'll see that all my webinars are up there. So you can find a variety of webinars on different topics. And I'm sure it's an exciting weekend if you spend time watching me talk to you about things, but they're going to be available. One of the things I'm going to spend the chunk of today talking about is trying to talk about ADHD through the lens of executive functioning and trying to see if I can provide some helpful strategies for you as parents. We'll then go into some specific parenting strategies, and then we'll end off talking a little bit about ADHD and media use, just because I know that's going to be one of the topics that's going to be the most important for parents out there. As I've said, so again, my name is Dr. Ed Roldan. If you don't know me, I'm the Director of Child and Adolescent Services at Etobicoke Psychological Services. We also have a clinic in Vaughan called EPS Family Health. I'm a clinical and school psychologist who worked in the school system for 10 years. The last 3 to 4 years, I've transitioned to full-time private practice work. And at the clinic, we work with all ages, all presenting types of concerns. And I personally, two of my favorite things are giving presentations and supervising. And so there's quite a few early career psychologists that work at our clinic, like Alina, for example. Again, I love doing these talks, and I'm also a consulting psychologist for the George Hull Center here in the West End of the city. Couple of things that I've said as every part of every webinar that I've done for Prime Care, I'm not providing any direct psychological services. We won't be able to discuss specific cases or situations. I'm aiming to provide some general information and resources so that we can walk away with maybe some small idea of how we can tweak little things with our children. I tend to say this all the time. I'm looking to cultivate awareness, dropping little seeds so that we can start to enact 1-degree change. What is one small thing we can do today that we may not notice, but will lead to long-term change? And again, I will mention some things that can have their own presentations. I won't be able to go into that much detail with all the topics that I discussed today. So I mentioned we're going to start off with a neuroaffirming approach. What does neuroaffirming approach mean? It basically means that we are taking an intentional stance supporting the idea that people have differences in their abilities to interact with and experience the world around them. Basically, we're trying to move away from a world of this is normal, this is abnormal. This is typical, this is atypical. In many ways, we all have different sort of ways of interacting with the world. An individual with ADHD is the same, that they might have different experiences as to how they organize things, how they experience sensory experiences, or how they sort of handle information in it might be a slightly different way, not necessarily a deficit model that we would have used in the past. And so oftentimes we're not going to be focusing necessarily on fixing, although you'll notice that I do still talk about like, this is how we help your child in this area, but we are trying to shift away just because sometimes, taking an approach of looking at it from a deficit model leads to kids and young adults and teens really starting to internalize some of their negative experiences related to ADHD, which can themselves be barriers, by the way. And so just you're gonna, I just wanted to start off and set the tone with that. So we are looking to accept people's differences in how they think, learn, process, and perceive information. And part of why I'm bringing this up is just so that if you've never heard of neuroaffirming, it's just sprinkling a little bit of some vocabulary that maybe you can look up and you can start to incorporate into your own mind frame when we're interacting with children who have ADHD or autistic children as well. Let me ask you, and you can know whether you can react in any way. Does this resonate with you at all? Imagine you're exhausted, stressed out. Some or all of the following have been on your mind. Perhaps you're thinking about money. How are we going to pay for this? Maybe furnace broke. You need glasses. Kids need braces. Car has a flat tire. You're thinking about what's for dinner today. The kids hate it when we eat blank. Fill it in with whatever you can think of. I missed that call from the school today. I hope everything is okay. I need to make it to my dad's or mom's to check up on them because they're not doing well. I also have to call that agency to book appointments for my son, daughter, my child, to get on the wait list. Any of that resonate with you? Anybody? Thumbs up or... Again, now that I can't see the chat, I don't know if anyone's responding. So I'm going to assume somebody's like, at least it's resonating with some of you. Now, how about this? Does this ever happen? You walk in the door and everything is quiet, serene, orderly in the house. Your kids, they surprise you, or your partner surprised you and they've cooked dinner, or the call from the school was about how well your child is doing. And your parent calls and it tells you that everything was fine. And an agency goes out of its way to call you to tell you that there's a spot open in that coveted free program. Now, does that ever happen to you? Has that ever happened? Most likely that is, a figment of our imagination, right? Most likely what's happening is you walk in through the door, you're exhausted, you're tired, maybe you're running errands, maybe you're coming from work, kids are racing, telling you that one hit the other, you go through your son's bag and there's a note from the teacher requesting a meeting, the kids roll their eyes at you when you mention what's for dinner, one of your children refuses to pick up after themselves, and you yell again at them, you take away something like technology, send them to the room, and you told them that they're never getting that iPad back. And maybe you call them a brat or something worse. Does that resonate with you? Does that happen in your house? You might also, by the end of the night, when you get to bed or you're sitting down by yourself, and maybe it's 11 p.m., you start to recognize that you just added a new rule to the house, or maybe you bent another rule again. And at this point, when you're alone, you start to beat yourself up. You start to say, I suck. Why do I keep doing this? Why can't I help my child? If this happens to you, welcome to every parent we ever interact with, including myself, right? This is life for many parents, and for families of a child with ADHD, this can be magnified. Like this experience of feeling as if you're handling, 1,000 things at once can be magnified in families of children with ADHD. And so that's why we want to talk about what we can do about that. One of my favorite, if you watch any of my previous webinars, I should say that every topic that I talked about in my other two webinars applies to ADHD. So one of them was about being a mindful parent. Another one was thinking about how we can start to think about the type of parent we want to be, and trying to learn how we can pause and stop to be very deliberate in our actions as parents All of those topics, and you can go watch those webinars for free at our YouTube channel, will apply with ADHD. They're even going to be more important. And even though my hope was to do a talk about mindful parenting for ADHD, the reality is I'm only able to sprinkle a few things here and there. I kind of nerd out in a couple of slides, but a lot of what I'm going to be talking about is going to be more practical. But I just want to say that there will be aspects of mindful parenting that will come up in our conversation today. Alina, one other thing. If because I can't see the chat anymore, I'm going to just ask if there is anything pressing or anything, maybe I'll ask you to just jump in, okay?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. Given that I just talked about being mindful, I'd like for us to maybe start today's conversation by accepting one reality. And that is that while we think of ways to be mindful, or while we sit down to think of a long-term plan, or while we visit or watch webinars to try to better and try to find more effective ways of parenting, I just want you to know that we're going to accept that our child is going to continue to be blank, impulsive at times, disorganized, hyperactive, have big emotions. We're going to accept that that is a reality. That can occur while we are also looking for ways to just tweak how we interact with them, with the school system, with our children, with our partner, just with ourselves as well. Okay, so this part I'm going to go really fast. I'm going to go just because I imagine that if you're here, most likely you have a child who already has been diagnosed with ADHD. So I'm not going to talk about this, but I've included in the slides just in the event that you want to look at them later and you want to go slowly through the criteria, but it's up there, okay? So a couple things about ADHD. It is characterized by inattention, hyperactivity, impulsiveness, and numerous self-management related issues. A couple of things that are important to recognize: symptoms have to be differ from typical. We talked about atypical and typical, so that's still part of the language where it differs from typical behavior of same age peers. And most importantly, it causes impairment somewhere in life. Impairment is an interesting sort of thing to explore because sometimes something can appear not to be impairing, but what we don't recognize is that we're doing a significant amount of accommodations so that it is not impairing. And I always use myself as an example. So, for example, if you ask me, one of the symptoms is losing items, and you said to me, Ed, do you lose your wallet? And I might say, no, I don't lose my wallet. But what you don't know is that I don't lose my wallet because I have a chip in my wallet to make sure that I can track it at all times. And so it might not appear to be impairing, but I've actually gone out and sought something that helps it not be impairing, right? So that question of impairment can be an interesting one to spend some time on when you explore from the perspective of what are you doing, what hoops are you jumping through to make sure your child has these things done, completed, handed in, so that they don't get in trouble here, here, here. So sometimes impairment can sort of differ once you pay attention to it a little bit more closely. Symptoms have to be present before the age of 12. And normally the diagnosis is either inattentive presentation, hyperactive presentation, or combined presentation. I will go through those very quickly. Couple of things: chronic issues with forgetfulness, time management, getting off task, not listening, getting overly emotional when frustrated. It's linked to parts of the brain being underactive. So there is some sort of organic things going on. In terms of inattentive, usually the best way, I'm not going to go into detail. The best way I can describe an inattentive presentation is someone who's scattered. Right? People who have trouble getting started on tasks, have trouble sustained attention, have trouble with procrastination, can often lose items. They're the ones who might have items across a whole room, for example. The second type of presentation is hyperactive impulsive. I often joke with families that these are the kids who you don't want to be in a small waiting room with. They're the ones that are climbing over you to reach that toy, or that look at that toy, or look at that magazine, who are climbing, who don't pay attention to space, who might also, I often joke with families again too, when I'm doing an assessment, I gauge these kids by how much I'm sweating in an assessment. If I'm sweating because I'm redirecting and I'm grabbing stuff, they're grabbing stuff impulsively and I'm trying to take it away, and I'm moving around and shifting and trying to sort of corral them so I can do an assessment, that's the more I sweat, the more I start to think, is this a hyperactive sort of presentation? One thing I didn't mention, usually you'll see a gender split here, right? Where a lot of the boys will present as hyperactive impulsive. They're the easier ones to diagnose. They're the easier ones and more likely to be brought up for an assessment. Oftentimes you'll see girls or females who will fall through the cracks because they're quiet, well behaved, and yet what you might not realize is that they are having significant difficulties with initiation of tasks, with organization, time management, or handing things in. So what's the impact of ADHD? There's impact on social skills. Think about a child who is impulsive, who's loud, who doesn't listen to other kids. They might have a lot of clash. They might clash with their peers quite often. They might also have difficulty, this is why why you're here, is how about the impact on home life? Everything from morning routines is scattered, stressful. It's almost like you're running through an airport to catch a plane every morning. Bedtime's going to be impacted. They don't want to go to bed. They don't want to get off technology. They might push and negotiate. Technology uses are going to be an impact, right? They want to play video games. They love playing video games. They love being online. They might have big emotions. They might eat a lot of sort of unhealthy foods and be impulsive with eating. And then another big area is homework, right? Anything that requires effort and they have to sit down for a prolonged amount of time is going to be a stressful period. And anything that requires coordination, planning, of course, attention, organization, those executive functioning skills that we're going to talk about, all of those are going to be quite, impaired. And for a family, they're going to be stress points. And usually behind a lot of the stress and fighting that might happen in a household. So, what are some evidence-based approaches? These ones I'm going to go through very quickly. I have provided at the end some links to resources for each of these sort of programs that I'm going to be talking about. So what does the research say about what's effective for ADHD? First one is going to be behavioral parenting training. And these are programs that focus on teaching parents specific skills, usually to manage their child's behavior effectively and often seen as the first line for under 6, but can still be done until around age 12. So this will be things like creating house rules, putting organizational systems in place, starting to develop routines, using very clear and simple instructions, learning to praise good behavior and ignoring mild incorrect behavior, planning ahead, working with your child to go in public places. For example, having a plan B if they're distracted and they're starting to get energetic in a public place, having something to keep them busy, using charts and point systems and rewards and consequences. One thing I'm going to spend a little bit of time here, and because I think it's a really powerful thing to remember, is oftentimes when we talk to families, what we start to recognize is that when we look at our reactions to behaviors we want to see versus behaviors we don't want to see, what we don't recognize is the level of reinforcement we engage in for behaviors that we don't want to see. I'll give you an example of what I mean. Let's say that our child does something we want to see, and let's say a sibling shares with another sibling. We would say, "Hey, nice sharing, like really good sharing. I love that you shared." And I might give them a little high five. It's a very fleeting sort of like reinforcement, and they walk away. Okay, nice. Now, if they do something that I am unhappy about or I don't want to see, I might get down on my knees, and talk to them and make a connection with them and talk to them about what disappointed me about their choice or why I'm not happy with their choice. And unfortunately, what I am doing is I'm spending a lot more time in connecting when I'm talking about a behavior I don't want to see. Just something to keep in mind, right? In terms of like when we're reinforcing the things we want to reinforce, we want to make sure that we're actually making it genuine and we're spending some time connecting with our children in those moments because that we don't know how powerful that connection will be. And we want to make sure that that's happening more often for the things we want to see. At the end of the presentation, you're going to see that I included Dr. Kasdan's program. This would fall under this BPT sort of framework, and he offers a free program that you could sign up for as parents online. A second program that's been evidence-based is called parent-child interaction therapy. This program is one in which parents are trained. It's almost like how football players nowadays like carry like their helmets and they have plays called into their earpiece. So that's how it works. Is you put a child and a parent in a room. Usually there's a two-way mirror. There's a therapist on the other side of the glass, and they guide the parent through that interaction. Okay, so you're trying to focus on how you increase the quality of the interaction between the parent and the child. And we're looking to enhance connection and parenting skills through that medium. Okay, again, very specific. Very few agencies will probably offer this program. I do provide the link to a website where you can look for people who offer this type of program. Usually this is for under 6 as well. There's some research that it goes up to 10. So you could be using with some of the children. If you want to improve your relationship with your child, this could be one of the options for you. I'm just going to give you a really quick synopsis of an acronym they use in parent-child interaction therapy. They use the word PRIDE, and the idea is when you're interacting with your child, the first thing you're doing is praising, and you're very specific about the praise, right? And so you're giving immediate feedback. Great job asking politely. Great job letting your sister play. The second thing you're doing is the R is reflect, so you repeat and comment on what your child says and does. You played freeze tag with Josephine? That sounds fun. So you're reflecting. When you reflect, what you're telling the listener is that you're actually listening, or the speaker that you're actually listening. Third is imitate. So you try to, if a child's playing something, they're drawing, is he just coming next to them and drawing next to them? Or they're playing doll, you come in and start playing with them right next to them. You're not directing. One of the things that is emphasized in this program is you are not the one in control. You are joining your child's play. So you're imitating. They're leading something, you're imitating. Another skill that they work on is describing. The best way of thinking of describing, it's almost like narrating. You're basically telling the child what you're seeing in their play, or what you're seeing in their sort of environment. Isabella's on the swing. Oh, now she's playing with whatever. So you're just describing and almost narrating what you see. And lastly, the last skill here that they emphasize is enjoying. Displaying enthusiasm about whatever your child is saying or doing in that moment. Trying to connect through enjoyment. Okay, and engagement. I like the word engagement better. Engaging in that interaction with your child. So again, there's a link at the end for this program. Couple of things that they talk about in parent-child interaction therapy to avoid, and I already talked about this. First, you want to actively ignore inappropriate behavior. So again, that example of what I gave earlier, where we turn and we get down on our knees and really connect with our child when they're doing inappropriate behavior. Oftentimes, what we talk about in this program would be sort of planned ignoring, right? Not choosing your battles, choosing some things, let some things go, and ignoring some inappropriate behavior. You avoid giving commands, you avoid asking questions, and you avoid criticizing. Okay, so we want to be, it's child-led. We want to join our child in that experience, and we're reflecting, we're imitating, and we're commenting on what we see. Another big one that you're going to see is going to be collaborative problem solving. You might, without knowing, you might have heard of this already. This is Dr. Ross Green's work. CPS involves working collaboratively with your child to identify and solve problems together. It emphasizes understanding the child's perspective, teaching problem-solving skills, and finding mutually acceptable solutions to conflicts or challenges. Usually, you'll hear about collaborative problem-solving with older kids and into teenage years. And usually, we're looking at 4 steps. The first is the empathy step. It's just trying to understand what your child is going through in relation to that problem. Trying to be empathetic to your child's experience in that scenario. 2 is where you actually express as a parent, what is it that you're concerned about in this interaction? 3rd is an invitation to collaborate. And then the last one, and this is my favorite thing about CPS, is trying to understand that no child really chooses to misbehave, or children rarely choose to cause problems. And so if you're seeing a challenge, One of the questions that I think the collaborative problem solving does well in trying to get parents to recognize is, what is it that your child is communicating when you see these big emotions, or when you see these challenging behaviors? What are they communicating? What is something that they can't handle or they don't have the skill to handle for that scenario? So it causes us to be mindful, to take a step back, to say, whoa, what am I missing here that I'm not understanding? And this helps with the empathy step. Um, Sorry, I don't know why there's two slides of that. So I just reviewed like three main evidence-based programs. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on another one, but just to quickly say one other thing is that what are the other additional evidence-based approaches? I'm not going to spend too much time on them. One is medication, right? So that's something that you should be talking to your physicians about, but medication is evidence-based treatment for ADHD. And the other one is trying to implement school accommodations and support. I will be talking a little bit about this once we get into the executive functioning aspect of our talk. This is now my nerdy starting one of the slides where I'm a little bit nerdy on, so I apologize. I'm curious if, again, I don't see the chat, so maybe if anyone's willing to say, yeah, this is me. Do you have any of these experiences? Having these thoughts like, my child will always struggle. There's nothing you can do about these things. My teacher and my teenager and I often clash. They always seem to crave my attention. It's just how my child is, and sometimes it feels like they're quite manipulative. I wish others understood how challenging it is to raise a child with ADHD. Will they ever be able to succeed in the future in school? Will they hold a job? Will they have families? Everything is a constant battle. I imagine that there's going to be times for everyone in this room where we will think some of these things. I raised that to now shift to a thought experiment. I'm curious. Here's my one thing that I'd love to hear in the chat is, can you think of your child's strengths? Is that an easy task? Maybe in the chat you could just say, yeah, that really easily I can, or did I have to pause? Maybe you don't want to share that. It's okay if you don't want to share. But can you think of your child's strengths right now in the moment? I ask you. Maybe today was a tough day. Can you think of your child's strengths? Maybe I'm just going to ask you to reflect on that. You know why I asked that question? It's because I had an experience once in a team meeting at a school where a parent was so overwhelmed, and somebody, I think a lot of schools will often start a meeting with strengths, and someone asked the parent, tell us your child's strengths. And I can still recall the horror in the parent's mind or face, sorry, when they drew a blank. In that moment, at that team meeting, they weren't able to identify strengths. And to me, what I view it as is a sign of just how overwhelmed that parent was in that scenario. It has nothing to do with them not recognizing their strengths. But I say that to you because if you've seen my other talks, one of the things I want to sort of bring attention to is that context changes how we experience specific scenarios. My child having an big emotions at home is going to be vastly different than my child having big emotions in the middle of an amusement park or the middle of Walmart. So sometimes we might have trouble connecting with our child's strengths if things are overwhelming. And if we're thinking about those questions that I asked you to think about. When I work with clients in therapy, I often will talk to them about, I will use the scenario of, imagine you are entering an acting scene and I give you a script. And the script is to be a confident parent, a parent who is readily available and flexible and is going to be able to handle anything that comes their way. How might you act in that scene versus if I give you a script that tells you you're defeated, you believe there's no out, you believe there's no way around this, and there's no chance of improvement? How are you going to act in that scene if that's the script that you're following? And I think it's really important for us to reflect on that so that we can start to understand where we are at during these difficult moments. And one of the very first things that when I talk to parents about mindfulness or mindful parenting is starting to become aware when we are falling into automatic pilot, when we feel like I better just, like, I'm not even thinking about my choices. I just do this, 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 and this. And the reason I say that is, and I love this flashlight analogy. And here's the analogy. I'll be quick because I'm a little bit nervous about the time. Imagine that you walk into into a basement and it's pitch dark. You can't see anything. And the one thing you have is a flashlight. And you shine the flashlight on the wall in front of you. And as you light it, you see like the wall is lit. Everything else is pitch dark, but you just see the flashlight lighting the one wall. And on the wall, all you see are problems associated with ADHD. Getting in trouble, calls from school, fights, big emotions, defiance, whatever it is that you can think of for your child. Imagine that's all you see. Pitch dark, the flashlight is only shining on those characteristics. How would you feel if that was your frame of reference every single day? What if I get you to take that flashlight and slightly shift it just a little bit to maybe shine another light? And that on that light, what we have is all the beautiful things. Maybe they're creative, maybe they are athletic, maybe they're sweethearts, whatever it is. It's just a shift to look at a different wall. In that analogy, when I shift to look at another wall, the first wall doesn't disappear. So it's not about ignoring that wall. It's recognizing there's more in the room than that one wall. And one of the very first steps of mindful parenting is trying to recognize that. Sometimes I'm almost like a horse with the blinders, right? This is what I see. This is my experience. And I think it's more challenging as a parent if we're not working on expanding our perspective sometimes, because I think just for your mental health, that's going to help. And as we increase our ability to be more mindful, we're going to start noticing that on this side of the wall, there's things like self-care for a parent, which is what I talked about last week, right? There are things on that wall that will help you be a better human being, be a better parent. And so that's why I like that analogy. So I said that I was going to spend much of today's conversation on the executive functioning approach to focusing ADHD. And what I'm hoping to do is I'm going to walk you through different ways of thinking about some of the challenges that children with ADHD have, and I'm going to give you some practical strategies about what to do with each one. Okay? So first one would be, so we're going to go through the lens of executive functioning. We're going to look at attention management, action management, task management, information management, emotion management, and effort management. So let's get into them. One thing about ADHD, and I heard this during a talk, and I really like this, is we often confuse ADHD with an inability to attend. And the reality is that ADHD is difficulty allocating attention. It's not being able to pay attention. It's being able to decide that I'm going to take my attention and I'm going to place it here. And it's going to go along with what society's telling me to do. So when the classroom tells me to pay attention to this boring lesson about whatever Canadian history, someone with ADHD is going to have much more difficulty allocating their attention to that topic versus that's a kid that might spend hours playing Lego or playing video games. So it's not about having difficulty attending, it is having difficulty allocating one's attention. One of the things that's important to pay attention to is that our ability to attend and change that flashlight is going to be harder when demands are high. So when I'm in a busy, loud environment, I'm going to have trouble taking information and attending. If I'm overly fixated on something, really engaged, it's going to be hard for me to attend to something and to shift from my preferred activity. The classic example here is you have asked your child to do something a number of times and they don't respond, and we think naturally he's choosing to ignore me. They are choosing to ignore me. This is where we are working on being mindful to recognize that that is now the script that I am using to guide my interaction with my child. He's choosing to ignore me. And so a couple of things for helpful strategies in terms of what can we do about that. One, Very simple. It seems almost like overly simple. And that's actually something I should say. Once we start looking at some of these strategies, and I actually have it in one of the slides, it's not rocket science. Some of the things are so basic and so like just explicit. It's about explicitly targeting some of these areas. So first thing is obtain your child's full attention before making a request. Wait for a pause. I'm going to give you an acronym for this in a little in a bit. So wait until you have your child's attention before you give them an instruction. Second, this is going to be really important both for home but also for school. So if you're dealing with educators or you're talking about an IEP, somebody who has trouble attending and allocating their attention, you want to declutter and sort of make their workspace and pages not be cluttered, be simple and direct. You want to offer space with reduced distractions. This is where we get a child who can write a test somewhere in another room. If we're at home, we want to set up a place where it is for homework. There's no other, like oftentimes we hear kids who do homework on their bed. Not for a kid with ADHD. You don't want to have that. You want to have them in a place with reduced distractions, and they have they know that their number one thing that they're doing at that location is to do work or study. You want to try to think about things like getting noise canceling headphones. I often share with families and clients myself, when I'm writing reports, I'm wearing noise canceling headphones and I'm listening to instrumental music. Right? Instrumental music is enough to keep me sort of engaged, my brain's engaged, but I'm also not singing along to lyrics. I give this recommendation to all like older kids and teens when they're looking to study and they struggle with ADHD. To me, something like that is a really helpful strategy. You want to also provide things like countdowns and prompts before shifts, whether you're using visual schedules, whether you're using a list of some kind, whether you're saying, okay, 10 more minutes, son, 6 more minutes, 3 more minutes. A lot of what we're talking about today at the beginning is going to be quite resource intensive, but over the long term, 1 degree change that we've talked about, it will become easier as it becomes routine. We're also looking at chunking and breaking work periods into smaller units. I gave you a link to the Pomodoro strategy. I'll go very quickly through the Pomodoro strategy. The Pomodoro strategy is an evidence-based approach to homework completion, for example. And the way it works is, let's say you have a child in grade 9, they can't focus, they can't study for tests, they tell you they've studied for 3 hours, and meanwhile, when you ask them later on, they barely, they're probably on Snapchat, they're probably on YouTube. The Pomodoro strategy is where you try to get the child to do something for a specific amount of time. So let's say, for example, half an hour or 45 minutes, you put a timer, they do one thing over that half an hour or 45 minutes. Once that time is done, they get a break. It's a reward. One thing about the ADHD brain, they want rewards. They want a reason to do things. And sometimes, unfortunately, we need to externalize that. So we might get them to do half an hour, 45 minutes. They finish, they get a break where they can now go guilt-free on YouTube or Snapchat or whatever it is. And we're putting a timer on that. And then they come back after 10 minutes or so, and they come do another chunk of a Pomodoro. Once you do 3 longer chunks, once you do 3 chunks, you get a longer break. Okay, I provided you a link at the end of today's talk about how the Pomodoro strategy works. Another strategy, very simple, that I would encourage and I often talk to my clients about is just engaging in more mindfulness. And I don't want this to be overwhelming. Oftentimes people are like, oh, now you're adding something else to our routine. No, I'm not. Mindfulness can be done while you're waiting in traffic and say, hey, how many blue cars do we notice? What are the sounds we hear around us? We might be eating dinner and say, hey guys, so why don't we stay quiet for 30 seconds and try to listen to the sounds around us? Or why don't you, when we all take this next bite, I want you to notice what it feels like on your tongue or what it tastes like. Engaging in regular mindfulness is going to be helpful in getting a child to learn how to attend to present moments. Second area is action management. This is the ability to monitor your own physical activity and behavior. This is where the kids who struggle with action management are fidgeting, hyperactive, impulsive. They often don't think about consequences, may cross the line, may sort of be abrupt. They might also have difficulty with fine motor skills or writing. One of the things that's the most frustrating for families or educators is that children who have this difficulty will have trouble sort of learning from mistakes, or it may take much longer to see actual behavioral changes. And how we interpret it is often he or she or they are not trying hard enough. Okay, that's how we interpret it. Again, being mindful, we're thinking about how we interpret that interaction. And so, what are some strategies? We want to be able to provide things like exercise and access to movement breaks. In the school setting, we want them to be able to have special chairs where they can wiggle, or they can have sort of fidget toys, or they might be, they might be given tasks to do around the school. Like, okay, before we sit down for a big math lesson, why don't we get Johnny to walk around and collect this? Those type of things. We're looking for OT support. We're providing them assistive technology. We're giving them grips for their pencils, or maybe we're giving them graph paper if have trouble with letter formation or spacing. Oftentimes we have to praise and reward and set limits. And most importantly, we have to have patience. And we'll talk a little bit about what that might look like in a bit. I'm sorry if I'm going really fast. I just have a lot left. Um, Third area is task management. Task management includes difficulty with organizing, planning, prioritizing, and monitoring. One of the things that this, by the way, this doesn't respond to medication. Medication is not going to give you a kid's skills. Okay, so I just want you to pay attention that this is probably something, even if you see improvements in due to medication, these are still skills that we're going to have to explicitly teach to the children with ADHD. One of the things that we often see here are things like time blindness. Time blindness is the inability to actually know how long something's going to take. So, for example, or knowing or giving yourself enough time. So, for example, my wife gets mad at me every time because when, let's say, we're getting ready for something, I start getting ready like 10 minutes before we have to leave the house. What is that? What happens? We're always late. Why? Because I just assume that I have enough time, and I never do. Right. So one of the things that we have to do when we notice that in our child is that we need to start doing things like, one of the steps you'll see later is like tracking how long things change. Let's spend a weekend just actually writing, what time did you wake up? How long did it take you to get dressed? How long did it take you to brush your teeth? And we're gathering information as to how long things take, just so that we can actually make informed decisions when we're having to prepare for something. This seems to be, and clinically, this seems to be the biggest stressor for when children get into older grades and into the teenage and adult years. Um, I already talked about this. So using of timers, reminders, lists. Again, as I said at the beginning, adults are playing a big role in this. You're the ones reminding your child. Maybe you're providing a list, or laminate something outside their door and say, this is what you're doing first, this is what you're doing next. Ideally, when I give this recommendation to families, I often say, get your child to follow along in the list and check off whenever they've completed something. And as they become better at it, start adding more things to the list, or start removing parts of the list so that they can start to do some of the things independently. You want to be explicit about certain routines. So, for example, maybe Friday nights after dinner is always going to be mindful family night before we watch a movie. We might be specific about things like schedule events. Okay, every day before the half an hour before dinner, it's homework time. This is where we're implementing organizational systems. Again, whatever that might be, a whiteboard somewhere, stickies, whatever it might be, calendars, reminders on your phone. It's about implementing things. There's a saying in one of the programs that we use for this type of skill is that if it's not in your agenda, it doesn't exist. Don't rely on like keeping things up here, saying, I'll remember that. No, if it's important, put it down somewhere, write it down somewhere, whether it's on the whiteboard for everyone to see, whether it's on a calendar for everyone to see, whether it's in a Google Calendar of some kind with reminders. If it's not in your agenda, it does not exist. It's a really nice little strategy to start talking to your kids, particularly as they get older, to start thinking, if this is important, we're putting it down somewhere. So I provided here a list of like one of the things, just because I wanted to make sure I give you an explicit example. So using of lists, let's say that you want to target something like morning routine. The way you might use a list would be, first, there's some guidelines. Keep the list short. Okay. If there are things you can do the evening before, do it the evening before. Don't add it to the morning routine, especially at the beginning. You want to keep the initial stages very simple. So you'll see at the bottom, it's like a 5 steps. It's like get dressed, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, get dressed, eat, brush your teeth and hair, get your backpack, leave the house on time. That's what you want on the list. A lot of the other things, if you can remove them, put them the night before. So getting your clothes prepared, preparing lunch, all those things can be done the night before. Don't put them on the morning routine. Okay. Avoid unnecessary things. If you want them to make the bed, great. That's something we can handle much later on. If it's a struggle getting out the door, we're not making them make the bed at this point. We're focusing on these 5 steps. Okay. You want to focus on the things that absolutely must happen. Once they can master this and they can do those 5 things, we're adding to that routine. Maybe then we're adding making the bed. Maybe we're adding preparing the lunch in the morning or whatever it is. We want to start off small and we want our child to reach success for us to then start to implement harder steps. You could do things like mandating a time when this list is going to be completed by. So if you have to leave by the house by 8, you want to make sure that they are done those 5 steps by 7:45. Ideally, you want them, again, as I said earlier, to be independently crossing out. Okay, I did step 1. Okay, come, they cross it out. Step 2, they cross it out. Okay, if you want to get creative, you can also start to emphasize that if they're done on time, they have free time. If they're done by 7:40, they've added another 5 minutes where they're free to do whatever they want to be doing. And this is where you can also tweak with rewards as well. You do this the whole 4 days of the week, you're able to get done by 7:45. Guess what? On Friday night, you get to choose the movie that we watch or something like that. The next one's information management. And this is where something like working memory can come into play. This is how, one thing that I want to emphasize here is that working memory in children with ADHD can be fleeting and inconsistent. What I mean by that, there might be a day where they might be able to remember a list of items, and then there might be a day when they can't remember simple instructions. Remember that working memory capacity. So working memory is the ability to hold information in your mind for some purpose. So like remembering a cell phone number, remembering 3 steps of what you're supposed to do next. That's working memory. We use it all the time. In the classroom, we use it. In our life, we use it. If there are competing demands, working memory is going to be depleted. If someone's talking to me, if I'm listening to music with lyrics, if I'm paying attention to something else and 2 screens and I'm multitasking, working memory is being depleted. Okay, so one of the things we want to understand is what are the things that are impairing our child's working memory capacity. Classic example of this would be you send your child off to do something, you walk into the room and they're doing something completely different. This would be a question of either they're distracted or it could be a working memory issue where they forgot what they were supposed to be doing. One of the reasons that's really important to notice here is that when a child is caught, like you walk into a room and they're doing something completely different, recognize that in that moment, your child most likely is going to feel one of embarrassment or shame. When we feel embarrassed and shame, we want to push away and have no one look at us. And so the best way to push away and have no one look at us is to be defiant or aggressive. This is, think about that. You catch your child doing something that they weren't supposed to be doing. They're going to feel shame, embarrassment, and they might explode in some way, which is a really effective way to not be looked at when you're feeling shame or embarrassment. Couple of helpful strategies. A lot of it is going to be overlap, using simple language, reduce steps, again, list outlining procedures, things like asking your child to repeat what is expected of them. For younger kids, children may need to monitor, okay, what's happening. I noticed that whenever this is happening, he doesn't remember. Like, you got to pay attention to some of those things. In the classroom, this would come out as things like missteps, incomplete work, sometimes appearing to not be listening. Um, I have a feeling I'm going to have to go really quick at the end, guys. Maybe I'll just choose what I'm going to talk about at the end. But emotion management. This is where emotional reactivity can be part of ADHD. It is not necessarily a separate thing. It can be part of ADHD. And one of the things that the way this comes out is increased emotional responses when we're under stress. Okay, think of the example that I gave to you earlier. When I'm feeling ashamed, frustrated, angry, how might I respond? Now, if a child you have a child with ADHD who's constantly be hearing that they never follow through, they're always getting in trouble. After a certain amount of time, they're starting to internalize that, right? I'm always getting in trouble. I'm so useless. I'm never successful. And now at home, I'm having trouble because I forgot certain steps. You better believe that you're going to see some big emotions come up in those experiences. Everything I talked about in my last 2 talks, again, applies here. Validating, labeling. I can understand why you're angry, connecting, trying to connect with your child when there's some big emotional responses. Acceptance, recognizing that big emotions are part of life and we're not going to try to fix them in the moment. And also at the same time anticipating what are the scenarios in which my child is more likely to have a big emotional outburst so that I can play a role in mitigating that. Lastly, effort management. One of the things with children with ADHD is they may struggle to maintain effort until an activity is complete. Often this is labeled as poor motivation. Sometimes it is labeled as they don't care for what this activity, or you don't care about school, and you never put effort in. And so we often make a decision or a judgment about our child being poorly motivated internally or not valuing the exercise that you're asking them to be involved in. Recognize that it could just be their ADHD. One of the things to note, and I've already said this, but I'm going to be a little bit more explicit, is as stress increases, there's more demand on our resources. So it's almost like if I'm walking on flat surface and all of a sudden I get to a hill and now I'm walking uphill, the same walking is now more effortful because I'm going uphill. The same is true if with a child with ADHD. As soon as you start to put competing demands and you put all these things in their environment, it's louder, it's noisier, it's not decluttered. You've told them 4 steps that are all really long sentences. This is like you're putting a lot of load on them, and you're going to start to see a child who's not successful. So a couple things to keep in mind. If they have projects, of course, start early. One of the interesting things is that kids with ADHD will often describe not being able to do effective work until they feel the pressure. We want to try and sort of interfere with that sort of belief that that's actually fact and try to get them to see that they can start something early and be effective early. You may need to scaffold as parents. So you might want to start by prepping a space, right? Like, so if we're going to start with a big project, all we want to do is choose, okay, where are you going to do work? What do you need to start doing work? Do you need your noise canceling headphones? Do you need to make sure that the Wi-Fi is on airplane mode? Do you need to, you can still listen to music, for example, with Wi-Fi off. You can do a lot of things. So do you have all your materials? Do you have the subject that you need? Can you start to chunk and provide breaks? The Pomodoro strategy that we talked about. One of the big things here is to reward effort. One of the most common things that we talk about in the clinic is families telling me that they're fighting over homework and they're spending hours upon hours trying to complete this homework task. This is where I sometimes clash with the education system because for me, I don't care about the curriculum. At a certain point, if my child is spending 3 hours to get to the curriculum, what I am doing is I am increasing that child is no longer enjoying learning. And it's actually, in the long term, I'm actually creating more difficulty for that child. I would rather us say, okay, this is what your homework is. What we're going to do is think about how long our child can actually attend for, and maybe it's 15 minutes, than if I'm going to break down homework chunks into 12 minutes. So I'm going to go lower than what I think they can handle so that I increase the chances that they're successful. So we're going to take that homework or that project and we're going to spend 12 minutes doing something. When that 12 minutes is off, just like the Pomodoro, a mini Pomodoro, I'm going to give them a small break and they can go play. I'm going to come back later on and give them another 12 minutes. After 12 minutes, I'm done. Guess what? That's a successful night, even though the project may not have been completed. I would rather teach that child that they were successful in doing those 3 chunks of homework than saying, hey, you didn't complete that project. That's where we also need to advocate for our children in the educational setting and try to see if there's alternative ways for them to complete the work and not be penalized by the fact that we're chunking that homework into those smaller windows. Um, I feel like I'm gonna have to really fly. So here are a couple other things that come up a lot. Procrastination. One of the first things I'm going to say to you, if your child's a big procrastinator, let's not assume that it's always going to be ADHD related. We want to know why. Something like anxiety can really start to play into procrastination or perfectionism. If I don't think I can produce my work up to a standard, I might not want to get started. So you really want to pay attention to what's holding your child back, what's their inner dialogue. Is it too daunting? If it's too daunting, then we're chunking again, starting earlier. Your child may also have trouble with prioritization. They might not know where to start. So I don't think our school system does a great job of doing this, is teaching them how to prioritize. Let's make a list of everything that's on your to-do list. Let's start ranking them based on importance and timing. When are they due and how important are they? And we can start to categorize them, and then we can come up with a plan of how we're going to target these things. We're basically at the time. So I'm kind of trying to figure out what I want to spend some time on. So I'm going to go very quickly, and I'm going to use one analogy, and then maybe we'll probably end and then I'll open up to questions. One of the things I mentioned to you that mindful parenting is one of my big passions. It's something that's really important to me. So I'm going to give you one last thing to think about as we try to expand our ability to be mindful if we have a child with ADHD. I want you to pay attention to those questions or those reactions that come up for you when your child is having a difficult moment related to ADHD. Are you questioning their effort, their willfulness, their laziness, or whatever? It's fine if you are. You're human if you are. What I want you to try to reflect in that moment is, are we able to understand what that scenario is for your child? What's it like for their child when they look around and they see frustrated educators, when they see frustrated peers, when they see frustrated parents? And one of the analogies, if you've ever seen my talks, you've heard me talk about this, it's the $5 million analogy. And this is the example of, if I told you that I wanted you to learn a language that is completely different than what any languages you know. So for me, I speak Spanish, but if someone said to me, I will give you $5 million, and I'll say, yeah, give me $5 million. And then they say to me, all you have to do is to learn Mandarin by Monday of next week. No matter how much I study, by the time I come next week on the Monday, I will not know Mandarin. And someone in that moment might say to me, you weren't motivated enough. You didn't care enough. That $5 million wasn't worth enough for you, or you were just lazy. And the reality is that the ask may be too great. This is also really important for kids who have things like sensory concerns. We need to recognize that sometimes we're asking them to do something that's actually internally uncomfortable for them. And so in that example, I just want you to reflect that if you see your child continuously struggling with something and you're continuously trying to get them consequences for something and it doesn't change the behavior, we might be asking the wrong question. A mindful approach might be to say, what does my child need in this moment that they're not getting? Because this often them rewards or often them consequences doesn't seem to be impacting anything. And so therefore the mindful approach would be to try to figure out what other things are missing in terms of the equation. I'll go really fast here. Another mindful approach, we can't get started with next steps until we monitor and recognize patterns. Right? We want to start writing things down. We want to start tracking. We want to start paying attention to what gets in the way of success. What are potential factors? One of the best questions to ask is, what needs to be present for the child not to struggle with that particular thing they're struggling with? Is there support? Are they well fed? Did they have a good night's sleep? Those are the things that we need to monitor for us to have more information as to how to help our child. As I said earlier, I'm going to share my slides so you can look at some of these acronyms. So some of the things that we want to do, I said earlier about how do you get your child to pause? So we teach them the stop analogy. Stop what you're doing. Take a few breaths. Observe what's going on, both internally and externally, what's happening around you. Look, your brothers are waiting for you for dinner. Proceed with intention. This is very similar to the dropping anchor that I talked about earlier in one of my other talks about finding a way to become one with the present moment so you can make a meaningful change. I'm a huge proponent of enacting, like trying to do more mindful moments as a family, trying to build them into like bedtime routines. So adding something like a 2-minute recording before bedtime. One of the great ones is sitting like a frog. I only put this idea of allostatic load in this slide just because you don't have to remember the terminology, but allostatic load is the concept that the more we put on a system, the less efficient the system will be. So if we're putting all these demands without chunking, without breaking things down into manageable chunks, or we're not providing time for exercise or ways to get out their energy, what we're doing is we're putting rocks into the kids' backpacks. And as they go through the day, we're just adding stress and adding cognitive load. They're going to be more efficient the more load we put on into their backpacks. So that's what allostatic load refers to. I won't spend too much time there. I'm just going to do one other one. Couple of things. This is very similar to a talk. What I did in one of my other talks is, if you're having trouble, like I don't even know how to start. I don't know how to even begin. This ed guy's giving me all these things, and I don't even know where to start. One of the things you can do is try to do an exercise. We talk about this as a beginner's mind. You know, when you have an experience and you can never replicate it again. The best way I can think of it is whenever you go to a new country or city and it looks so different, you can never replicate that again. The same is true even now. This particular moment, listening to Ed, is different than any other moment. One of the things that we try to do to be mindful and to try to develop that skill set is try to look at your child as if it's the first time you're seeing them. We often joke, it's like seeing your child as if they're from another planet. What would you see? What do you see in their qualities? What do you see in their strengths? What do you see in what they, what sort of joy they bring you on a day-to-day basis? And sometimes it's part of that process is like the example of moving over on a bench. This is what I mean by this is imagine, I don't know if I'm going to age myself, but in Forrest Gump at the beginning of the movie, he gets on the bus and no one wants him to sit. No one wants them to sit no one wants him to sit with them. So they say, seat taken, seat taken. And finally, Jenny says, hey, there's a seat over, and she shifts over. What I mean by that is oftentimes when we see challenges, when we see things that are difficult for us, we don't want to make room for them on that bench. And so we say push away and avoid, push and avoid. A mindful approach is often about accepting that there's going to be difficult experiences and difficult challenges. We don't have to like them, we don't have to approve, but it's about shifting over and saying, hey, I'm accepting that this is my reality. And once we accept, we're no longer fighting with that. And we're not wasting energy on trying to change things that are not change we cannot change. Okay. I'm only going to say, with ADHD and media use, it's interesting. The literature tells you that a risk associated with ADHD are exact same risk as associated with media use. Aggressive behavior, academic problems, attention problems, poor eating habits, and sleep problems. One of the links that I'm giving you at the end is the Media Smarts. I'm a big fan of the Media Smarts in that they provide you things like a green diet. So this is like if you're going to spend an hour on technology, you're also going to spend an hour outside and trying to match hours of engagement and doing other things with time spent on media. So a couple of things that are important: set daily limits, monitor content, monitor internet use. So that's different. Content is what they might be doing in video games or their comics. Internet use is how do they interact with the internet. We want to pay attention to the marketing that they're being bombarded with. We want to remember that we're modeling appropriate behavior for our family. And we want to do things like set a media bedtime for the household. We want to do things like sometimes we're using technology in a positive way, so teaching our child to use technology skillfully. So things like assistive technology, finding ways to access technology while reducing distractions. So this is the example of what I said earlier. You can listen to music while the airplane mode is on, so your child isn't getting notifications every time someone's sending them a snap or sending them a text. And this is what I'll leave you with. This is the last one in terms of if one of the great things or one of the strategies to teach our children, especially as they start to engage in social media, I want them, this is a great acronym to teach them. The weight. Ask them, who's the audience? Would you say this in front of a wide audience? Whatever you're about to send or this picture you're about to send, would you share it if you were in an assembly at school? Second, what is your affect or mood? Are you in a good emotional state right now when you're about to send this picture and or message? What's your intent? Are you sure that someone is not going to misunderstand what you mean? Is it clear? And then does it have to be sent today? Right? Is this something that we can wait on and evaluate later? I think this is a really good reminder, even for us when we're sending emails. It's like, I'm going to leave that email for tomorrow, and I'm going to sit on it a little bit. I do apologize for going so fast. A couple things when you look at it later, It's self-compassion. Again, I've talked about this in previous webinars. So important. The literature suggests that for parents of children with ADHD, self-compassion is going to be crucial. It's going to help in terms of your parenting, your interactions with your children, but just your own mental health. And if you really want to look at how you connect with your child, there's one more acronym that's going to be on the handouts. It's PACE. So be playful, be accepting of what comes your way, be curious, ask questions, look at your child in a new way, and be empathetic. One thing that's important about being empathetic is you can't do it when you're activated or agitated. So if you find yourself activated or agitated, this is where we're teaching our child things like, as a parent, I need to give myself space. As a dad, I need to make sure and I say, you know what, this is not the right time to have this discussion. Let's come back to it later. I really apologize for going so fast at the end. It was just too much information. Again, I'm going to share this. You're going to see resources. You're going to see, different things in terms of the resources themselves that you can access. Things like information on medication, information on the Pomodoro strategy, information on things like taking notes if you have older children, things like the media. How do you come up with smart media goal strategies? And then I'm not sure. Again, I'm going so fast. Is there any questions or comments?
There's one question from earlier on when you were talking about action management and the morning routines.
Yeah.
The question was, what do you do if they purposely avoid a task like brushing teeth at every opportunity?
Yeah, that's interesting. Is that a sensory thing? You would have to, my first thought would be I would want to know why they're avoiding it. If it's something like, it could be sensory, then you may want to sort of talk to an OT and figure out if there are strategies to help with that, whether we can use different brush, different toothpaste, and find different reasons for that. The other one would be, one thing would be trying to figure out what is, that might be one of those where you might choose your battles. What is the worst consequence of not brushing your teeth? There's a lot of negative consequences. You might want to let them see what the natural consequence of that and see what their feedback is. They might get feedback on that and they might want to start brushing their teeth. I purposely, my thing would be, honestly, I would be thinking about trying to connect with my child around that when they're calm and trying to understand what it is that's getting in the way and trying to find a way through connection to try to get them to brush their teeth. That takes time and it might be a while before they're brushing their teeth, but I might not choose to fight them in the morning, especially if I notice that I'm constantly losing that battle. But email me. Maybe we can have a conversation on that because it will. There are specific variables about family, about the child that might change my answer a little bit.
So then there's another question. Yeah. Earlier you mentioned don't change things you cannot change. How do we know what? Oops, I've closed it. How do we know what we can change and not change?
Yes, my question would be, have you tried to change it? And does it change? Right. Most often, what I would say if I'm working individually with a parent or I'm working individually with a child, I would say to them, remember that we're always focusing on our own behavioral choices. We cannot control other people. So if part of what I'm trying to change involves other people changing, I want to reflect on that. And the mindful approach is to accept that I may not be able to change. And I know that for parents, that's a foreign concept, right? Like this idea of like, what do you mean? I should be getting my child to do things. And I understand that. And I don't disagree with that. But there are times when I think the more effective approach is connection instead of just correction. And we can get caught on correcting. And what we're doing is we are basically opening the door to negotiation and fighting. And at the same time, we're causing damage to the relationship. And so one thing, if you've seen any of my other talks, is when we do like validation or those type of things, remember that validation of the emotion doesn't mean you're not going to have expectations. So my idea would be, if you're trying to change a child's behavior and it's not being effective, I would focus on connecting with my child. And through that connection, I would then start to see if they can see why changing is going to make sense. And then we can find a way to tweak and support them and scaffold them to lead to some changes that at a certain point, they seemed like we couldn't change them. And there's other things like systems you're not going to be able to really change, right? And so it's noticing what you can do, what you have control over the things that are beyond your control to actually change.
So there's another question. Does a diagnosis of ADHD require an IEP? So as an outcome of the assessment or the diagnosis?
It's a great question, and that's going to be board specific. It's hard for me to answer because some boards will have different policies around that. So that's going to be, you're going to have to ask that question about the school or the board. If I do an assessment and I diagnose ADHD, one of my recommendations is to develop an IEP. One thing that's really important, and I think I should probably do a talk on psychoeducational assessments, is that when I do as an outside person and when I produce a report, there is no guarantee that the school system that receives that report is going to follow through on all my recommendations. So a school board, if they don't believe in an IEP for ADHD, that's beyond my ability to enact on the development of an IEP. And so even though it might be in a report, that school board may not follow through with that based on their own policies.
That's all the questions we have at the moment.
Guys, I really apologize for going so fast. I feel like maybe I should have a second go at it and go slower, but feel free. That's my email, Dr. E. Roldan at Topical Psych. I really do respond to emails. If you have any questions or specific questions or concerns, feel free to reach out to me. You could follow us on Instagram or subscribe to the YouTube channel. You can access all the talks. I will share the PDF of the slides as well, which will include resources. And I'd be more than happy again to answer any questions and have any talks. If you're part of a school and you want me to come in and have a talk with teachers or whomever, I'm more than happy to join. So thank you. Thank you, everyone. Sure. Is there another question?
Yeah, so my child also has ODD and trying to figure out how to deal with defiance and refusal to do a task.
It's a big question, ODD. Oppositional defiance is a big question. So all of the behaviors that I gave you in terms of some of the interventions that we talked about, like parent management, those are going to be some of the same evidence-based approaches to ODD. Trying to enact sort of reinforcers, rules. One of the things, if you look at one of the links I provided is like Triple P Parenting. Any of these programs, what they try to do is to try to get you to choose your battles. Okay, even with a child with ODD, I would suggest that one of the key things is going to be choose your battles. Choose 2 or 3 non-negotiable things and let all the other things mostly go. That can be very challenging. Okay, so this is why you might need help from a professional or from a program. So you develop sort of 2 or 3 that are non-negotiables. That's your emphasis for any sort of reinforcement or consequences. And the rest of the time we're doing a lot of things like building relationship, trying to understand what it is that defiance is providing for the child. What are they communicating through defiance? Oftentimes defiance is a good way of masking things like shame again, or things like anxiety. So trying to understand why your child is being defined is also going to be another aspect of this question that sometimes when we're overwhelmed, we don't have the power to even pay attention to. And so some of the programs that I just listed or listed in the resources are going to be some of the best approaches for oppositional defiance disorder. But I would also encourage things like finding time for connection, quality time, trying to find explicit times when you are spending quality time with each other. And that could be on their own terms, and that's okay. So there's a couple of things there that, again, a lot of the things that I talked about will be relevant for our oppositional defiant sort of profile.
And there's one more question about what age you'd recommend start to look for an assessment for ADHD.
I don't know if there's an age. I would say impairment is always the main. For me, impairment is going to be the main indicator. And what I mean by that, remember, impairment can be for the child, but it can also be for the family, or it could be at school. So are there things that are getting in the way of him or her engaging in life if they're getting into constant trouble and you're getting called from work to pick them up from to leave work, if they're not allowed to go on trips, if you're finding that you're changing things around in your house and you're avoiding certain things because they're going to have a big outburst, that's going to be more telling for me in terms of whether it's time to do an assessment. It's the impairment on the functioning of the child within their environment.
There's no more questions now.
Okay. Again, thank you, everyone. I appreciate you coming. I will be sending this video over the next coming days. Thank you again. If anyone is interested in the next talk, it will be on parenting when families are going through divorce and separation. Thank you very much for joining us. Take care, everyone.